welcome to the show, everyone. I am glad that you guys are joining us, and we just give us a few minutes so that we can do our usual shares into the group and have a little bit of a build-up. Are you sharing group?
Yeah, I can go sure.
In the meantime, while the crowd is building, I would like to welcome our young economist Shane Lowe. You guys would have seen him recently on a lot of forums and in the news, and he's one of the young, up-and-coming, very smart, very intelligent economists that we have here in Barbados, and we are lucky enough to have him on our show. And he's going to be discussing the estimates that would have been recently discussed in Parliament and help us to break down some of the jargon, some of the terms that confuse us. Guys, feel free to post your questions so that if there's anything that we say tonight that seems a little bit too much to understand, let us know so that we can break it down a little bit better. And I'm going to turn over to Shane, let him give an introduction. I want to remind everyone that tonight is not about being political. I know there are a lot of distractions that you've been seeing recently, especially in the news. We are saving the politics for the price of everything show. You can get as political as you want there, but for tonight we're just trying to break down the information and see how we can get a better understanding of what's going on in Barbados and going on in our economy. So, turn it over to Shane, give a brief introduction or background on when we talk about the estimates. I know a lot of people know that it's something that people discuss in Parliament, but as to the details of what is involved when you're talking about estimates, way really is.
All right, thanks, Crystal. So, the estimates essentially are government's way of budgeting its revenue and expenditure for the upcoming year. The government financial year runs from April 1st to March 31st each year. And before the end of the financial year, it must come to Parliament and say how much it expects to spend on various line items in each ministry and how much it expects to earn in revenue in the coming fiscal year. And if there's a deficit, which would be a negative gap between revenues and expenditure, how it intends to finance that. Okay. Towards the end of the next fiscal year now, what happens is that in March, they come to Parliament again with a new budget and they provide revised estimates. Essentially, what their best guess of the current performance is. Okay. And that is part of what we had this week in Parliament. Sometime down the road, they will find out and they will know what the actual performance was, and then they can compare what the actual was versus the revised versus what they initially estimated 12 months prior.
Okay, so you mentioned the fact that if there is a deficit, how long have we been running on a deficit now?
Well, Barbados, as most economies in the Caribbean, actually do run deficits. You tend to not want them to be very large so that you can finance them sustainably. Since the crisis, however, the deficits have widened. The deficits have been of the nature of between 4%, getting as large as around 11% of GDP in 2013-14. And that was about $1 billion, even before you consider amortization, which would be the repayment of debt that is coming due.
Yeah. Just to break that down a little bit, because you mentioned that it's about 11% of GDP. Can you give an example, because a lot of people don't tend to understand what you mean when you say 111% of GDP. Is there anything that you can liken that to so people can get an understanding of what we really mean when we say that we are now standing at, say, 111% of GDP?
Right. So I guess the best way to look at it is if you compare various countries and their performance. You tend to divide the deficit and debt by GDP to allow you to compare how one country might do versus another. Because obviously there are some countries that are quite large, so if you just look at it in terms of millions of dollars, one country might have a bigger deficit simply because it's a bigger country. So as an example, Jamaica for some time has been running a balanced budget. So it's been able to more or less match its revenues by its expenditures. There are some other countries in the Caribbean, particularly non-sovereign ones, like the Cayman Islands, Turks and Caicos. They actually run fiscal surpluses, meaning that they bring in more tax revenue than they actually spend. And that leads to their debt falling over time.
Well, one thing just on Cayman is they have a mandatory law that requires them to stay within a surplus position or balanced budget. So
a law that they're actually following.
They cannot, if they need to exceed it, they actually need to have the government permission to do that, and he has to get permission from the UK government. So, for example, in Hurricane Ivan, that law, which just came into effect in August 1st that year, had to be suspended in order to facilitate the recovery within Cayman.
Just want to put a pin in this question, can either answer it now or later. There's a person in the feed who's asking if we can recover from this, which may be a little bit.
I think we need to deal with that after.
But yeah, so just wanted to make sure, since it's so early, to make sure that we put a pin in it, and at least one of us should hopefully remember to answer it later.
I have it here to
Yeah.
I think what we can do is just go through and let's explain, and then look at some of what the estimates were from prior years, and then see how what actually happens here translates. So maybe you could start with maybe this year and give an explanation of how the whole process works.
Okay. So essentially what happens is that, like I said, government has to budget for what it's going to spend under each line item, under each ministry. So the ministers or the ministries would submit what they expect to spend to the Ministry of Finance. The Ministry of Finance might compile those. There might be some guidance as to how much they can spend or what their caps are. And the ministry would also determine how much they expect to earn from taxes, whether it be income taxes, corporation taxes, based on what they expect to do in terms of either raising or reducing taxes, how the economy may grow, the level of tax compliance, things like that.
Okay. So you would have mentioned the different types of revenue that they would be earning. How does the BRA play into that? Because we recently even saw that they would have discovered that VAT was not being charged on some medications. So what role have you seen them playing in making sure that the revenues and the expenditures that are discussed in the estimates, that they're accurate and that they include or capture everything that they should?
Well, they have now become, with the amalgamation of the inland revenue and land tax and all of that, they've become the central authority to ensure that essentially government collects all of the revenues owed to them. They're in charge, like I said, for collection. They're in charge of making sure that people comply, for the audits that go on, etc. One of the things that IMF did mention in its last Article 4 is that for government to be able to increase its revenues, it should look to make sure that the BRA is running as effectively and efficiently as possible. And that alone can ensure that the deficit is narrowed without any significant pain or reduction in expenditure, etc. Of course, there may be things like that, and we'll get to those later on, but the BRA plays a very important role in ensuring that government collects what is owed to it.
We're going to get to those topics.
Yeah, but just one comment, follow-up comment, regardless of what the expected taxation is, you also have to make sure the economy is growing at the rate that's projected. So if the rate, if you're off on your estimate of GDP, you will be off on your estimate of taxes.
I think that's the purpose of this evening, is that what we're going through the process is that we come and we hear all these estimates, and you have these projected deficits, and then how real is that compared to actual reality when you next year? So from my understanding from you, Shane, is what happens this week is that we will do the estimates, and then as they get towards the financial year next year, they'll make a revision, and the revision is based on what they estimate the actual will be. And then there's another point in time when the final figures are in, that there's an actual to the revision. And so we have a situation where you have a revision, and then again you have another revision to the revision. So reality is that, and then what you have done is you've gone back over the years to see how relevant this is, like how far out we are from on a trend, and how accurate the estimates are. So basically it boils down to how much reliance can we place on the estimates, because if the government doesn't hit the revenue targets, or if the expenditure is higher, then the deficit becomes higher. So then if you're trying to budget if you're trying to look at it from a reality basis, we may or may not be off. So really what you're doing this evening is you're going to be looking at how the performance was from the estimate, which is where we are now, to what the actual will be. But you'll take us through the steps year by year.
Yeah.
And then I think what Shane is going to be doing is just drilling down and seeing in the material things in year, correct?
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right. So maybe we can start from there and you can go way back in time to see how we are in the estimates.
How we got here.
Right.
So in doing this exercise, I think the big takeaways are that government has traditionally, well, over the last, let's say, 4 or 5 years at least, you tend to find that the estimates are somewhat more optimistic than the reality. And there are a number of reasons for that. One of the reasons I found was that revenues tended to be overestimated in the budget relative to what happened. And what Colin said was, I believe, a key factor in that. You expect that the economy will grow by X%. It does not. And obviously, if the economy does not grow by that amount, consumption does not rise by that amount. So collections of things like VAT, import duties, those you don't collect as much as you expected. Corporation tax, if companies are not making as much profit. And of course, the international business sector did suffer somewhat over the last 4 or 5 years, and that was a major driver of corporation taxes. So that has played a big role in reducing the revenues relative to what government expected to bring in. On the expenditure side, what we found is that government did a little better at maintaining expenditures, primarily those expenditures that were not associated with debt service.
Okay.
But where you did see some discrepancy was in transfers and subsidies. So for example, the government might budget $150 million for the QEH for 1 year, but closer towards the end of the fiscal year, because that was not enough, they might have to go back to Parliament and get what is called a supplementary and take in another, let's say, 16-20 million. That pushes up the amount that the government actually spent on the QEH relative to the budget.
Yeah. So basically, let's see how we are, and then see, because and if we can use that to predict how much we'll be off, because if there's a consistency in how much we'll be off, then maybe we can now actually take this and dress this back to what
Might actually happen.
might actually happen.
Right.
Okay.
If I can want to make a comment again on a couple of years ago when the estimate process started, the Minister of Finance at the start of the estimate said, I have under budgeted for the QEH, and I have under budgeted for there were 2 agencies. I was pointing out immediately, it did not even meet or just met the salary costs of the QEH. So that in itself are tactics we have to look for, because it will trigger a supplementary. And this supplementary is the additional power to spend. So you can't actually spend before you get a supplementary.
So essentially, we're being told ahead of time that you can't rely on the information provided, which doesn't stand to any sort of business format, because reality is that that's what people are basing business decisions on, and investment folks from outside. So we need to be better in that regard. But as you say, let's get straight into the meat and go with Shane.
So just to give an example, if we look at the fiscal deficit net of amortization, so we're not including what government's repayment on debt was. In 2009-10, for example, the government budgeted for a deficit of $478 million initially. When it came back to Parliament the next year and it revised that estimate, that was $637 million. So you can see that's about 150 odd whatever million there. When the actual numbers came in, which is another year later, when they present the estimates again, they provide the actuals, that was $795 million.
So that's about 75%.
So you can see between approved and actuals, that's about 300 million there. So yeah, thereabouts.
So where were the differences? Was it in solely expenditure or was it expenditure and revenue?
2009-10?
Yeah.
Okay, so 2009-10, if you looked at the actual versus the approved, there was about 384 million was actually in revenue, which is the bulk of what we just saw.
So
there.
they underestimated the
Revenue again, yeah. And most of that was actually in taxes. So taxes were 447 million down. Non-tax revenues were up a bit.
So this is the argument that you hear coming all the time, because you keep seeing a new tax and you hear the cry from the public that the additional taxes are not working. You're charging these extra, instead of looking at collection of outstanding tax, you're adding on these new taxes and they're not having the impact that you're expecting, and it's right here in the estimates.
I think that if I remember a little bit of the economics, I might have the wrong term, like does the marginal utility of taxation.
There's a point where you get here and it's like, economists say no, we ain't dealing with that no more, and you just start gaining less and less.
So the percentage between if you actual and you approve, that first year was about 75%. So how did we do the following year? Because that was the first year, that would have been the first year that they that you had a change in office.
Yes.
So
things may not have come in the way that you expected.
So how bad was it done in 2010?
So 2009-10, the deficit was estimated at, just give me 1 minute.
But the one you did just now was
That was 9-10, sorry, so 10-11, no.
Okay.
The approved deficit was $702 million.
So we've gone up now by 300. So we don't come back to where we were
before,
so,
which at least they started off at a point that's more realistic.
So 700, and then where did we end up?
So you end up at 767, which was about 67 million difference. So that's about 10%.
Not as bad.
So the difference is slightly different.
Right. So that's within reason.
Yeah.
And then again, the difference again would be back in the revenue.
So the revenue played a big role as well, 48 million, this time around. And there was some increase in expenditure. Again, transfers and subsidies was up 132 million versus what it actually was budgeted to be. There were some savings in terms of spending on wages and salaries and things like that.
So the difference, again, the difference is about 60% of the revenue being off, explaining most of the difference.
Yeah.
48 versus the 60 and 69 million. So then now roll forward now to 2011.
2011-12, the data suggests that was actually a pretty positive year. The deficit was estimated initially to be about 700 million, and the actual was, according to the data, 542 million. So if you look at it, if you look at the trend of the fiscal deficit from then until now, 2011-12 stands out as what was a pretty positive.
So what would have now, what would have been in the explanation then as to what did we improve?
Okay, so in terms of improvements, it was mostly on the expenditure side. So there were not significant deviations away from revenue, but they were able to maintain these.
Yeah, and that was the first year. That was the year they made the adjustments in the allowances, and in the 29
the personal allowances.
Yeah, right. They made adjustments in that year, the personal allowances, and there was also an increase in land tax in that year. So you had to push up a temporary up in revenue, and you will see next year. I think you will see the revenue drop back down again.
So that was the year that we had our first internal devaluation, implicit internal devaluation.
And that was the year you also saw that increase significantly.
Your net take home went down.
Right.
So your ability to spend went down significantly for those who had allowances.
Right. And the excise tax on gas was introduced that year as well.
That was the first full year of VAT as well, going up from the 15 to 17.5% as well.
So again, we can point to that as being the start of our internal devaluation.
But I think
agreed?
Well, to some extent, I think what it points to as well is that while the government has an official budget process that where it comes to Parliament every March, there's also the other budget, which is the financial statement budgetary proposals, where it will come to Parliament and introduce additional measures to try to get it back on track in that instance.
The thing that gets me about those financials is that they're significantly misstated.
The budgetary proposals? Or the initial?
The financial statements that you're talking about.
Okay.
Which one? The estimates?
Yeah.
Yeah. It is not an easy process.
I know.
It's not an easy process.
There was a comment that was made. I wanted to just clarify, because you're calling numbers in a vacuum, but be calling the 700 and some, the 500 and some. Would these be considered large deficits as compared to other territories within the EC, and just wanting to get that out because they're large numbers to us?
Relative, I use relative to GDP. GDP.
Right. So when you look at relative to GDP then, so for example, 2011-12 was 4.4% of GDP, which is still a bit higher than you would like it to be, but compared to the 8.8% that we had the year before that was a significant improvement.
Okay.
The year after that, however, it went up again.
Right. So we now into 2012, 2013.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
2012,
So just a reminder, we were at a deficit of 500,000 after
Yeah.
the introduction of all the
VAT.
Yes.
the VAT and raising the VAT and
To
removing the allowances
17.5.
and really where the personal income taxes became.
When it was that change happened again?
What?
I think that was
Personal income taxes?
Personal
12,
income taxes.
13, I think.
Okay.
No, personal income tax, the allowances happened in the 2010 year.
Yeah, you know they started taxing the allowances in 2010.
2010.
Which
Right.
was
End of 2010, that was the budget,
Right.
it was in November 2010.
Right, so
Remember
then
back in
that
the
would be
money.
that figure. Alright, so we got the next one now.
Yeah.
Right. So 2012-13, again, the approved estimates provided for a deficit of 544 million, which is not too dissimilar from the actual performance the year before.
Right.
But then the actual performance was a deficit of 744 million.
So we went back to where we were
Yeah.
before the changing allowances. So
Yeah.
nothing was sustained.
No.
So I'm assuming that the expenditures went way up as well as the revenues dropped.
Yep. So both. Yeah. So transfers and
happened.
subsidies again, those were off about 190 million almost.
Who would have
or 24%
contributed most
difference.
to that difference?
I think I should have
QEH?
but it's very likely that QEH was a
QH
contributor.
was a factor in that year.
Yeah, so the QEH was actually
Yeah.
a major factor in that year.
Just curious, did revenue actually fall from the 2011, 2012 in the 2013 year? Did revenue fall?
It did, yeah.
Yeah.
So it
So you
went
see,
down.
that goes back to your point. You tax and then people can't spend.
There
So
you go.
then-
It
then-
just comes back.
It comes back because you're not spending, so you VAT, so you're collecting less
Correct.
VAT. You know, you're going through. So it cycles back in because you take more than people can spend. So then while you may capture it in 1 year, then you get you're going back. It's like
Yeah.
it's the analogy that I say. You know, is like if you're at a club, you raise fees, you have less people drop out.
Correct.
Less people go to the club, less people go to the gym.
Yeah.
So then is the total revenue with less people times the increase going to be less or more? Is going to go back to
Yeah.
Is it worth the increase?
Yeah.
So, for example, from 2008 to last year, real GDP grew about 0.01%.
Oh, wow.
Okay. We had a number of years in net real GDP growth in that period. So as you try, Barbados has always kept what's called a tax effort. The amount of tax that have been raised comparative to GDP, about 30 to 33%. And if you miss the GDP forecast, you're going to miss your revenue. You're miss your revenue targets.
So what did for that year? How much did the revenue drop
Revenue was down 193 million, so that's
from
about 7%.
not the budget? I'm talking about from the
Oh, the
previous
year
actual.
before?
Yeah, what was the actual the year before?
So the actual year before was according to the estimates, 2.5 billion,
Right. And then what was the actual in that?
2.43.
So it was so it fell like 100 million.
Yeah.
Right. So the additional taxation, although we had additional taxation, the revenue fell.
Yep.
Because the economy slowed.
So the economy slowed. So it will get back to a point that we're getting to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But and then the expenditures.
Yeah, expenditures were also higher as well. in that particular year.
So it was so what was the estimated revenue for the year? The estimated revenue.
The actuals or
The estimate. What was the estimated versus the actual? What was the change in the revenue?
Oh, the estimated was 2.6 billion, and it came in at 2.4.
Right. So that was down 200,000,
Yeah.
which is the actual deficit. Because you said the deficit like 200.
The deficit was down about
200 million.
thereabouts, yes.
200 million, right?
Yeah.
So in reality is the revenue.
Revenue
coming.
plays a big role.
Yeah.
Sorry. That's why I started by saying I think one of the key takeaways is that it's hard to estimate what you're going to get in revenue. It's easier to determine you're going to spend X or Y. So I think that's one of the reasons why the fiscal consolidation efforts have been so difficult, because a lot of the measures have been based on the revenues, which of course you're not sure what you're going to collect. versus expenditures.
No, the thing that puzzles me a little bit in the world of private sector, when you have your financials, you have a principle called conservatism, and it basically means don't don't overspend and don't underestimate your expenses. So if you have certain estimates and you think this is the best range, middle range, low range with revenue, you tend to stick to the lower range. And when it comes to expenses, you try to overestimate as much as possible so that when you actually have your actual numbers come in, you're looking either close or better than what you would have budgeted for. I understand the pressure in the financial world. People would not want to stick to that principle because obviously you come in with a budget that doesn't look very good. It doesn't look good on you or your department. What is the pressure for government in terms of not leaning towards more conservative figures when they're putting out the budget, especially when you have actual numbers that come in so far off from what was estimated?
I guess it's difficult to say, but I suppose the fact that there's always that second budget, those proposals that they can bring to Parliament, means that they can always pull that out of the back pocket, so to speak. I think when we move forward, we will see that 2016-17, the performance based on the revised estimates was actually a lot more favorable.
Okay.
And we can remember that there were a number of measures implemented, two of which were particularly successful: the National Social Responsibility Levy.
Was that legal?
Well, I'm not a lawyer,
Different
so I
stuff.
don't know that.
That's a different discussion.
That's a different
And the amnesty, which the minister himself said
yes.
that
Brought in a lot of persons.
Yeah, more than they expected.
We're going to talk about that amnesty too as well. So we at the stage now where we're off again by about 40 to 38%, roughly like 37-38% on that year. So the deficit was projected at 500, came in at 700, and primarily it was the fallout with the increase in taxes, less spent. So what about the following year now?
So 13-14 was, in recent history, the worst year in terms of the deficit performance. Like I said, it was about 11% of GDP, and the deficit net of amortization actually reached almost $1 billion. The approved estimate was $516 million. So you can see the deficit almost doubled relative to what it was projected to be. So it's about $500 million difference. The revenues came in almost $400 million less than had been projected. Current expenditures, again, the transfers and subsidies being the major culprit there, were up $140 million. And those were the two that really drove the...
Right. So the revenue. What was the revenue projected compared to the actual of the prior year?
The revenue projected was $2.59 billion, 2013-14, and the actual $2.43 billion. So they actually expected revenue to rise, and it fell relative to both.
So it only came in at like 2 billion.
2.3 billion.
Right, 2.3 compared to 2.5.
Yeah.
Right.
Will you mention about 400?
The $400 difference.
Million.
Sorry, it was $300 million. Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong thing. $300 million between the actual and the approved estimates.
Right. Okay.
And the expenditure was almost $200 million difference.
Right.
So that's really $500 million.
Right. So you're off. So basically off 100%. Close to. Right. So we except for a couple of years, we basically somewhere between 38 and 100%.
And those years where you did well is the first year you would have introduced significant taxes, and you get the initial grab until people catch themselves.
Right. And then, all right. So the following year now.
Following year.
Which year is this now?
14-15.
Right.
Right. The deficit was estimated at $565 million, and according to the estimates further down, the actual performance was a deficit of $845 million.
So we are 60%.
There's a difference of $280 million.
Right. So that's about 60% here.
50%. Right. Yeah.
And that again came with the fall in revenue.
So some of that was the fall in revenue. Again, a lot of that transfers and subsidies. Actually, transfers and subsidies played the bigger role that year.
Again, so we're in which year again now? As
14-15.
So then, what was the actual revenue in 2013-2014?
The actual was 2.3 billion,
And then what was the estimated for 2014, 2015?
2.5. So
So,
again,
so
the
they
expected revenues,
expected revenue to go up 200 million,
Mhm.
but it actually fell how much? What did
It
it?
increased about 100 million.
So
They
it went
expected
up.
about 2 and it increased 100.
So it went up. So in other words, it only went up half of what what was expected.
Mm-hmm.
And that was solid waste tax here, right?
I can't remember which year that came in,
Solid
but
year, solid waste tax was 14, 15?
14, 15.
Okay,
Right.
okay.
So that gave a temporary boost.
Yeah.
yeah, the solid waste tax was 14.15, the bank asset tax was 14.15 as well.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
I
So
forgot about
those
that.
gave a temporary boost.
Yes, it did.
All right. So now we'll go forward to the next year.
Okay, 15, 16, I believe was a bit better. Things started to improve. The economy started to see a bit of growth in tourism, etc. The approved estimates were 734 million. So
That deficit.
the deficit. And the actual, based again on the latest data that we just got from these estimates, 728 million. So
We're pretty much on par there.
yeah, just a $6 million difference, and there's a favorable variance in this case. Yeah. The revenues actually were about 20 million above what had been estimated. Expenditures, the current expenditures were above what were estimated, but, and this is another theme that we saw going through, capital expenditure on fixed assets, infrastructure projects, and things like that were actually done. So I mentioned at the beginning that government has been able to maintain its expenditures except for the interest costs over the period. And part of that has been because it's kept capital expenditure subdued. So I guess it hasn't ballooned even further.
Right, so we have a couple of questions here that I'm going to roll back to. Someone mentioned that the data doesn't include changes in accumulated arrears.
Right. So there's no official estimate that I've seen of the.
But you want to explain accumulated arrears?
Okay, right.
Yeah.
So arrears essentially, just like any business, government might contract someone to do a service, and they might owe them. They might say, "Okay, I'm going to pay you in 6 months," and that 6 months may come, and they might not pay them, and it becomes an arrear to government. Government owes that person, so there's an arrear.
But it's not reflected in the estimates? Or the
No. If government pays it, it will come out of the. You will see it come out of the expenditures, but otherwise.
But is it on an accrual basis or on a cash basis? Because the estimates are prepared on two bases.
Right.
One is on a cash basis, where you would not include the expenditure, and the other was on an accrual basis.
So what I'll try to do is to focus on the cash for
Right.
this purpose.
Yeah.
So those figures don't accumulate. It's not. And explain an accrual basis is that if it's an expense but it hasn't been paid yet, you still have to account for it. So you're saying in those figures, anything that hasn't been paid for would not be accounted in that?
No.
Right.
So then the expenses then could be, but substantially the revenue, is the revenue done on the same basis too? Is it done on a cash
Well, these
basis?
revenues are based on the cash. I haven't taken the accrual revenues.
Okay.
I believe the expenditures are based on cash. By sweet subtraction, I believe the
Okay.
expenditure.
Right. But one of the things that happens in the revenue is that they're not accounting in the revenue for the refunds due, the VAT refunds due. So the revenue is actually on a hybrid cash basis. So they do not.
And that's not affected in expenses
And
either?
it's not reflected. It's not reflected. The refunds are actually on the government basis reflected in the revenue line and not in the expenditure line.
So, but it's not reflected in those numbers?
It's not reflected.
So then,
It's not
again, the
cash
revenue numbers are then overstated as well.
Correct.
And you can have a situation that more likely the expenses are understated as well.
Right. So then you have the situation where you said there was a big collection of revenue or arrears of taxes which should not count in this financial year, but should count back to other financial years.
But that doesn't happen.
But it's not going to happen.
So they're not adjusted?
They're not based on what you said in terms of success in amnesty. That is going to be reflected in the 2015-2016 financial year.
Okay.
And we now understand the optics of why the cutoff date for the amnesty was February 15th.
So they will, okay.
Right?
The issue I understood with that is that Kaipo has this like one-page thing that you're supposed to fill out every January, and a lot of people don't really know and understand it. The problem is that the penalties involved in that, and I'm speaking on a correction because I've just advised this by someone, and I did personally.
$10 a day.
$10 a day, and it started in 2015. So if you
This
have
started last year. They started 2016 for reporting for 2015.
right, so you're into 2 years now. So like say for example, a lot of people that have these like they start companies to do like a little entertainment, just have a one-off type event or something like that, and you start companies and just have them there dormant. Every day is $10. So if you're into 2 years now, that's $36.50 a year. So the problem is that before you could actually do your tax filing, you had to go and pay off for that. So there were people that.
No, that's not true.
But that's what someone had told me.
That's not true.
So was
That doesn't. Your KIPO filing is not tied to your tax filing. It is not tied to your tax filing.
Somebody told me that they went to do their filing and they said you got to do the KIPO filing, and then they were hit with because they had some companies that they were just had around that they started for whatever reason and never did anything with it. And there's a lot of companies.
KIPO is not. KIPO nor the Immigration Department falls under the authority of the Barbados Revenue Authority.
Okay.
And when the Barbados Revenue Authority tried to issue a requirement a couple of years ago with regards to tax certificates, and they were saying to immigration, someone has to produce a tax certificate. I believe the Bar Association corrected them on that. The Bar Association also had to correct them on it in terms of trying to tie a tax certificate for land transactions.
Well, thanks for clarifying that because someone had come to me with that,
Yeah.
and obviously then when I was telling some other people who had companies like that, they were in full panic mode because I know a lot of people along the way. You have tons of proper events and people start a company and say next year we'll and then file this one-page thing, which is something that which I don't really understand because they have all the records and they want you to file to make sure that nothing has changed. It's just a one-page something.
It's actually about 4 or 5 pages, but that the annual return is something standard in most of the jurisdictions, and it was a requirement prior to
it was, but the $10 a day,
is a significant penalty.
It's a penalty, especially for people that
and it's not capped, and it should be capped.
Yeah.
It should be capped.
So if somebody's not listening to this tonight and they have a company and they come back 4 years from now, you got $12,000 bill for a company that has $0 in it.
Right. Which again, what we've seen in terms of penalties, like when we went from a $10 penalty for late filing for personal income tax to a $500 penalty, which is now built into the revenue estimates, but it's not equitable.
Right.
It is not equitable. So some of those things are falling into revenue projections, which are not reasonable, and I think if you challenge them within the court system, you will find they're not, because there's no cap. There's no cap, and you have to have a cap at some point in time.
Right. So let's just run through some questions because the questions are coming in. So we're going to deal with what we're going to deal with. We're going to deal with questions specifically to the estimates, and then there's a lot of people asking, was the way out or was the way forward? So we'll address that so we'll go through it sequentially. So all the folks are asking the way out. We're going to address those questions. Following up from the last question about the accumulated arrears, the same individual wanted to know to highlight the impact of debt service costs on overall expenditure and illustrate how cuts in discretionary spending have been outpaced by rising debt service.
Okay.
So I'm not sure if you have that information, but if you do, we can share it. If not, and we can always come back to it later and post it in the group.
And just for the viewers to give a background on what discretionary spending is.
And debt service.
And debt service.
Right. So debt service would include essentially the interest that you're paying on the debt, and of course you also have to repay the debt, so you can include the amortization as well. If you just look at the principal on the debt.
Yes.
If you just look at the interest component of it, That has accounted for as much as almost 30% of government's revenue in recent times, which is up from about 13-14% in, say, 2008-9.
Yeah.
It's actually been one of the fastest, if not the fastest growing expenditure item. Because if you think about it, if you run a deficit of, say, 500 million this year, you have to borrow to finance that. Next year, if you do nothing different, you have to finance the same 500 million plus the interest on the 500 million from the first time. So you might have a deficit of, say 525. And you can see that if you don't make substantial adjustments early on, that starts to balloon and gets out of control, which is somewhat like the situation that we have now. The interest has stabilized somewhat, and in the estimates for the coming fiscal year, the government has actually projected that the interest will fall, which is on the surface a bit surprising because of course it's still a deficit, so you have to finance it. But their rationale is that they're going to be seeing a switch from more longer term debt to treasury bills, shorter term, which tend to attract about half or a third of the interest costs. So just to answer the question, yes, debt service has been accounting for a substantial amount of government's revenue, and it is one of the reasons why government has not been able to increase expenditures on things like some of the social services, the capital expenditure to maintain infrastructure in the way that it needs to be, and things like that.
So in other words, the mix of that spending figure has shifted considerably into the debt service rather than the social service side of government. So so then we get these situations like the QEHs and the potholes and basically the lack of spending on the infrastructure. So the idea is if we can isolate one key component that needs to be addressed is the debt.
Yes, very much so.
The debt is actually much more a significant problem than salaries and wages. Salaries and wages are right around 25-28% of revenue.
So even if you go through line item by line item and you make all the changes and you strip it down to bare bones, we still have the debt service component that's not going away, and you can't strip that unless there's other mechanisms to deal with it, which we can try and get to. One of the questions coming up, we talked about was internal devaluation. Now, obviously there's the textbook internal devaluation, and then there's also what we would have had is involuntary and involuntary internal devaluation. But maybe what you can start with is just explain the textbook what internal devaluation is.
Well, I suppose you can think of it in terms of reducing your spending power, essentially. What the government has been trying to do, or what their stated objective has been at least, is to protect the foreign exchange reserves by limiting the demand for imports. And by increasing taxes, particularly on consumption, so you have the increase in VAT, you have the the imposition of the National Social Responsibility Levy and other taxes on consumption. What they've been doing is that if you made, let's say, $5,000 a month and you spent $3,000, now you're still making $5,000, but you're spending
$4,000.
Right. Not because you're purchasing more items, but simply because
a pack of tea things used to cost $1, and now it costs $1.80.
Exactly. So that is, and that is somewhat similar to if you actually devalue the exchange rate. If you devalue the exchange rate, what you're doing is that you're making imports more expensive, and because we import most of what we consume, it has a similar effect.
But that's the issue that I have had, because I don't take issue to his directive to reduce the amount that we spend on imports. My question has always been, where is the direction in terms of spending? Because without spending, you don't have growth. So what industry is it that we're looking to have grow in Barbados? What are our local...
Right. So it goes back to the comment you made in terms of CapEx is down. And then it goes back to the other comment, the other issue that if majority of tax effort, the burden of taxation falls on consumption. If your strategy is an internal devaluation, you will never yield your revenue expectation.
Right.
I think you need to explain CapEx.
CapEx is capital expenditure, which is on buildings, highways, schools.
So the flyover that we saw.
Those investments. So, and one of the reasons why the capital expenditure is down is because all of the projects that they've been talking about, like Sam Lawrence and the port and whatnot, have been delayed. So the stimulus that would have come from that capital expenditure, which would have been funded by foreign direct investment, meaning money coming in Barbados to invest in those projects, has contributed to the slowness of the growth in the economy.
Right. So, again, looking at the true definition, the evaluation, the definition, is that where it's actually explicit that you're going to cut the labor costs to try to give you some currency evaluation, a currency advantage without having to do the specific thing called devaluation. So while we have not explicitly been given an internal devaluation, implicitly, and it's not a best kept secret because everyone can feel it. The reality is that when you go to the store to buy, you have less to spend, and that effectively should have brought down the demand for foreign exchange, and it does not appear to have done that. And part of the reason could be?
Part of the reason is that if one of the other components of it is that we've gone through the de-risking process in the international business sector, which is slowly growing. So de-risking means basically that the banks have said we will no longer take this type of business because we believe it is too risky for us to keep on our books. So what we're seeing is a contraction in the actual number of companies in Barbados, international business companies in Barbados, and a slowness of new companies coming in because they just can't open bank accounts. And then on top of that, we had a change in the Canadian budget, I think in 2013, which affected the formation of offshore banks, Canadian-based offshore banks. So all of those have contracted the international business sector, and the taxation that was earned from the international business sector has contracted significantly over the last 5 years. So in addition to going from the decline from the global economic recession to 2007 to 2009, we have had those additional effects on the island, and we have not been very aggressive in terms of dealing with the de-risking. And we also have factor which was another component which also accelerated part of the de-risking process by the Canadian banks in particular.
Right, so getting back to because we're focusing on the estimates and then we want to roll into some of the other questions.
But those are really things that impact the actual revenue estimates.
But so on a general consensus basis is that yes, there's some level of reliance. We would have to do the statistical analysis and the standard deviation, all that, and whether you can place reliance on. But on the basis, because it's a government is a little bit different than trying to project a business. And so what we have to do is basically when we see estimates, we essentially have to take it with a perspective of we don't really know. You know, because we've seen situations where a 500 million has been projected and you end up with it was $1 billion in 1 year. Right. So you know, so when you have that kind of disparity, or you can have a 700 million deficit projected and end up with 726, or was it 726 and 700? So you could end up on par. So the challenges that you have, we in Barbados as the average person trying to understand these, is that when we see all the estimates going on for the whole week, the reality is that we have no idea as to the reality.
And it's important too to understand when you see a particular line item what the implications are. So, for example, if you see that taxes on goods and services are rising, then it either means that government is going to raise taxes on goods and services, or the economy will grow quickly enough so that people will consume more. So if you know that you can feel that confidence is low, the economy is not really growing, then you can start to wonder, well, are they really going to get that revenue?
Right, so let us look at it. When you had stimulus where there was easing with the personal income tax, which you increase the spending, because once you increase the spending in the economy, you have a different problem. You get into you escalate the foreign exchange problems. So while we may be looking at balancing the budget on one side, if you ease on the taxation, you create more spending in the economy, you put pressure on the foreign exchange. So you have a couple of different problems to solve. So we have to compartmentalize them. So we'll get to the foreign exchange. Alright, so if we look at this, and as an outsider looking at your numbers for the first time, it would seem to me is that when you raise taxes, the revenue goes down.
Well, I remember when the VAT first went on, the revenues went up. And then it dropped.
Because there will be a lag.
Yes.
A lag to earning, because not everyone adjusts everything in their spending cycle right away. But
they eventually adjust.
Then you have to make adjustments, because then you eat into savings and all that. So you can see that the lag is to the adjustments is like a year. So if every year that you raise taxes, you add on additional tax, the revenues are going down. What does that say? What can you interpret from that?
Well, it says that we've reached a point where,
saturation point.
Yeah, essentially, yeah, and
so no more blood. You can't get blood from
there's
stone
limited
anymore.
amount that you can get out of it without actually growing the economy. It means that some of the adjustment now may have to come on the expenditure side, which obviously is somewhat controversial, because the largest expenditure item would be the same transfers and subsidies, and those include things like transfers to the hospital, the university,
which are additional
Transport
salary
board.
rates. The additional salary rate cost is hidden.
quite
It's
large.
hidden. That nice transfer.
So those are the conversations that I guess nationally we have to not start because we've started, but continue to have about what is desired
is to be cut.
and what we can do without, and what we need.
Every time you call something to cut, everybody gets up in arms, but at the end of the day, you have to cut something.
Yeah, the thing is that the problem I see is that we reach a stage where you're at castor oil stage. You know, we've let it get to the stage where these numbers that you presented tonight is nothing new. They were there for everyone to see. All the organizations, I leave out none of them. I would keep saying, I call them the silence exam organizations. We wait till now, till the patient is on life support, to start to try to deal with these issues when you've highlighted back then that there were a problem back then. We should have been dealing with this 5-6 years ago and do it on a transitional basis. So now we're at a stage where now what options are we left with?
Exactly.
You can't pull any more from the revenue. You can't pull any more. We also have to be very careful in terms of easing back taxes, because you're now going to put pressure on your foreign exchange. So now, all right, so you're going to look at the transfer subsidies. You have to make drastic cuts because you have to balance the budget. You have not only you're looking at debt service payments, but you also have to look at when bonds and debts come due. Because if we have what is the bond issue coming due this year? There's
we have this year and next year the government will continue to pay Credit Suisse, and that takes a fairly big chunk of the debt service. And then going forward into 2021 and 2022, there are two very large
ones come, the $200 million.
I think one is 300, one is about 400, and that is on top of the usual debt service.
But what about the local debt that's coming due this year?
So there are the T-bills, but then there's about, let's say, 500 million at least in long-term debentures
coming due this year. So you can't go back to the printing press. That would just be totally irresponsible. And,
it's already going to pass irresponsible.
And you can't keep using the NIS as the ATM. So we have this 500 million looming on the horizon. It's unlikely that the banks or the investment are going to increase their exposure by accepting a rollover. So how are we paying for that 500 million?
Well, the likely thing that will happen is that the NIS will roll its maturities. The insurance companies will probably roll some, if not all of theirs, because they need to maintain that long-term asset versus the liability. And the shortfall, if it's not taken up by the banks and the other private sector players, will probably fall to the central bank, providing that adjustments are not made to the expenditure so that you close the financing gap right, for government.
So we have all these things on the horizon. So like one of the things that we're doing here is we're trying to explain to people the problem, but we don't also want to come with problems. We want to come with solutions.
Right.
Last week, a couple of weeks ago, we touched base with the offshore, the international business sector, and there seem to be a few interesting things happening there. But then there's some external factors that we have no control of, which I think BIBA is doing a session towards the end of the month.
Okay.
So hopefully we will get a report from that. So we have a few sectors that we need to address. One of the other challenges that we have is that while we keep talking about devaluation, the Barbados dollar actually appreciated in value against our important currencies. Because when the US dollar went up 30% versus the Canadian and the UK pound, the Canadian dollar and the UK pound, it carried us with it.
Right.
So we have a revenue stream which, from a tourism perspective, comes primarily from the UK and also Canada. So we have a revenue stream that now is 30% more expensive to visit here. We also have a lot of Canadian and UK companies here, international businesses here. So it creates a challenge for them.
Yep.
The issue is that our expenses did not fall by the 30% because most of our expenses are in US dollars. So we just maintained, so had it been the other way around where the expenses fell then and our people can spend more and they appreciate it, then it would have been better for us. But we're now actually in a position where we actually we need to have the US dollar devalue for us to get back to be competitive with the UK, and that's not going to happen anytime soon. Right. So we have these challenges that we have to look at and address. So we're hoping that the international business sector, because we can't get out of this with taxation, and the reality is, from my perspective, we can't just go and do a slash and burn on the expenditure. There has to be some moderation. It has to be reasonable and rational.
And targeted.
And strategic and not political. It got to be economical. We got to look at the economic structure, not the political structure. But it has to be addressed. We can't have a situation where you have the two main people standing up in Parliament and they essentially giving you no solution. And you can't have a no idea and a hope is not a strategy. So the challenges that you have is you have to hope that the international business sector, that they can be a driver. Hopefully next week we're going to be discussing tourism. So we're hoping that there's some nuggets within the tourism. There's a couple of people here that have been mentioned about agriculture. And one of the things that we've been posted is that one of our topics is going to be on sustainability. Because there's a couple of key components of our foreign exchange, and we have to solve that foreign exchange bill. We have oil, which we do no hedging on. We could have hedged when it was $30 or $40 a barrel, and we would have been fine. So we have oil and food. Food. We have, and food can actually solve some of our employment problem because you have a lot of farm land. There are a lot of projects that I know people are trying to start, but there's no. The incentives are not there for them, and it's very difficult for them to assess. It's extremely cumbersome. When I spoke with one person who I hope will come on and give his experience, but if we had a situation where we now can go into the sustainability and go after the food and look at reducing our food import bill, it reduces our foreign exchange, and you're going to provide employment. And we can do it in a situation where we as Barbadians got to say, well, let the buy local be actually not a fashion statement. Let it be with real meaning. And we start to address those type of problems. And from my perspective, I'm an optimist. Right now, it's very difficult to be, but I think that we need to start looking at solutions. We know that tonight we've addressed the estimates. We know that it could be anywhere, all over the place. And I actually really, honestly, stopped listening to the estimate debates many moons ago for that same reason, because I know that what is said there today has no bearing on what it will be come before. You know, you're going to go through all the supplementary and all the parliament issues. But so I think that what we're doing is, if we compartmentalize, what we're doing is, all right, how do we get from here? If we look at it from the estimate perspective, what can we do from here? What's your thoughts?
So I think our immediate challenge in the country is on the foreign exchange side. Yes, the deficit is large and it needs to be financed, and that has contributed somewhat to the deterioration in the credit rating. But the reserves have declined now for the last, say, 3 or 4 years consecutively. And while, yes, the gap between exports and imports has traditionally been relatively wide, what you actually found in 2016 is that that gap closed. And the reason the reserves fell, significantly so, is that, no, actually not oil. Oil actually helped. The reason reserves fell are 2 reasons. The foreign direct investment projects that were to start did not come in.
So I got you, the reserves fell. I thought you meant they got closer.
Sorry, the gap between exports and imports declined partially because of oil and tourism.
Right.
But the reserves fell because you saw that foreign direct investment did not come in as you expected. And also, quite importantly, what typically happens when government has large maturities of debt or repayments is that it might go to market and it might get some money either from the capital markets or from the multilaterals, the CDB, etc.
Okay.
If you look at the estimates, you will see that the proportion of government's deficit that's been funded from foreign sources has actually declined. And part of the reason is because the credit rating has declined to an extent where it's very difficult to access international markets. Because of that, then, we need to be able to restore the credit rating or put it back on an upward path so that we can, going forward, when 2021 and 2022 come, we can refinance those large maturities. Now, back to the estimates in the fiscal deficit. The reason the credit rating is where it is because the deficit has missed its targets on many occasions and still is quite too large. So what we need to do is to make some hard decisions to get that deficit down, restore, at least stabilize the credit rating, and put it at least on a positive outlook, an upward path, regain access to capital markets in the short term, or access funds from multilaterals, so that we can restore the foreign exchange reserves to a sustainable level and then refinance whatever debts we have that are coming due. So I think those two are linked. Restore some sort of fiscal sustainability and then reaccess markets so that we can ensure that when those debts come due, we're not left in a position where we have to use reserves to pay them, because at this stage, the level of reserves we have is not enough to pay for those 2 large bonds that are coming due in 4 to 5 years.
There's a question I wanted to get in before we run out of time, because there's more than one person would have asked something along those lines. If anyone can explain why our dollar is pinned to the US dollar, and what the advantages, disadvantages, and what would happen if we unpegged.
So, I suppose this obviously happened before I was born.
Yeah.
But I suppose the reason why it's tied to the US dollar is because most of our trade at some point in time has been the US dollar. Most of our imports likely come from the United States and CARICOM, and most of the CARICOM nations are actually tied to the US dollar as well. So it helps to have a stable currency. And there was actually a time where most of our tourists came from the USA as well. It is only over the last decade or so that we've actually seen the UK market outstrip the US market. What happened
in your time?
Well, in my time,
you can only speak to our time.
the situation, though, if you remove the peg, it depends on what you're going to do.
Yeah.
So you have 3 options, is the way I see it. You either peg it to another currency or a basket of currencies. You allow it to float, which is what Jamaica did, and we can question the success of that. Or you dollarize, which is essentially you say that you adopt the US dollar and you give up having a currency of your own. Dollarization is very similar to having a fixed exchange rate, except for you can't print money because you can't print what you don't own.
Exactly.
So then it means that as a government you have to be very fiscally responsible. But those are the 3 options that a country would have if it were to remove the exchange.
What's your opinion?
I think from the time you decide to allow the currency to float, you tend to lose control of where it goes and influence. Trinidad can allow it to flow because they have 10 months of import cover.
Yeah.
They have the foreign exchange that they can enter into the market to smooth out fluctuations if they need to. Barbados at this stage and Jamaica traditionally, we haven't had that. Even Suriname last year, 2015, they allowed their currency to float, and it went from about 4 to 1 to about 7 to 1 over time. It's kind of settled at about 7, 8 to 1 now. But you can see that you tend to lose control. So if you want to maintain some sort of stability in currency, I don't know if that's the best idea.
We don't have the foreign exchange to support a floating currency.
Nor the productive capacity to export as much as you would want.
Our economy is really too small
Yeah.
to permit a float to happen. You need about 4 or 5 times the size of our economy to float.
So that's an option. So
It's
the
not
other option is to either leave it where it is.
Or dollar raise.
Or dollars.
Dollarize is no option. It's not because it takes away that
It's a bit
buffer.
only, it's very similar to a fixed exchange rate, except for you have to be fiscally responsible.
Correct.
Which some people might say is a good thing, but of course, there might be
We
times
have
where you
proven.
need to have that capacity and that lever to pull.
To do that, you need to use the type of legislation that exists in Belize and Cayman Islands to enforce the fiscal rules. The other alternative is actually going back to the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank Authority, which Barbados was a part of prior to independence, prior to the formation of the central bank. So in 1973, the central bank was formed, and we moved, like Jamaica and Trinidad and Guyana, away from the Eastern Caribbean Central Currency Authority to create our own currency. The EC dollar, prior to the big push for independence in the 1960s, was in fact tied to the pound and not actually tied to the US dollar.
Right. So one of the options then, basically 2 options we have is either keep it where it is, or we
Join a currency union.
and or we type a different basket of currencies.
Right.
And those present other challenges and
I suppose. I think they all present challenges, and they all say that you have to be fiscally responsible. So, I think that's the key. In any of the regimes that you hold,
The fiscal responsibility.
exactly, that is something.
so we look at the currency now. We go back to our debt situation. How close are we to the IMF?
Well, the thing about it is that you have to want to go to the IMF and invite the IMF in
Right.
if you want them to come in. So that is probably a question for politicians and not so much me.
Yeah.
Well,
Okay.
let's change it. Let's change it. How close are we to a lending agency?
The question is, when should we have gone to the IMF?
You're making it seem as though we should have gone
We
ever since.
should have gone in. Barbados is a small economy. Once you had the follow in 2007, 2008, where you knew that your major trading partners were going to crash, the safe haven was in fact the IMF, right? And the IMF has a number of different programs, which is only North's point. We have a number of different programs that are available to islands like ourselves, countries like ourselves, that are exposed to significant world economic events. And that was where the support currency, the balance of payment support and debt restructuring could have happened from as early as 2009, where we would have the protection of a more stable interest rate regime. And we would be able to borrow at concession rates from the IMF, and we would not have exposed ourselves. There's a chart I was just referring back that showed Shane earlier, where we've gone from triple B to where we are now, and the spread against the single A and the triple B rated securities in the market is almost 5%. Right? But if we had dealt with this problem in 2009, 2010 by saying we are exposed, let us go to the safe haven, we would have stopped a lot of this rot.
It would have mitigated a lot of it.
Right. Tom Adams in 1978, 79, 80, he went to the IMF for a standby arrangement before he was forced into a structural adjustment program. There was some pain, yes, but in terms of...
It was smooth.
It was smooth. And this is a point I got to re-emphasize. What Arthur has been making for about 4 years, and it's a point that David Espin also has been made, we need to do something with our net for 4 or 5 years.
It's been more than 4 or 5 years people have been talking about debt restructuring. I've been hearing that for a lot longer than that.
Right. And the space that we had to restructure that we're rated at triple B.
We don't have that latitude anymore.
We don't have that latitude. The yields on or the effective interest rate on triple B bonds now is about 5%.
We're at 10.
And we are 10 over 10.
So
So we cost ourselves double what we should be costing ourselves.
Yes.
See, I again, this is what annoys me the most. I saw one of your titles is you're in risk management, correct? So in every situation I've ever been in, I've always looked at risk mitigation. I worked with someone once that had no clue about anything to do with risk. So when you start to look from a proactive perspective, never could see it or understand it.
Right.
And the famous comment was, hindsight is 20/20. And the strategy was always hope. But hope is not a strategy.
Right.
And if you don't address it, and if you don't make a more conservative, what I call risk mitigating approach, you end up in a situation where you are hindsight 20/20. And that's where we are. And again, going back to our governance thing, I hold the government accountable and responsible, but I don't blame them. I blame what I call the silence exam organization. That's my pet peeve. What we're discussing today should have been discussed, as Colin said, and have a mature discussion in 2009, 2010. We shouldn't be coming here in 2017 and saying we're going to have a discussion. We're going to have 2 committees that are supposed to give a report tomorrow. We should have been having this discussion in 2009, 2010. And my problem is that we're at castor oil stage. And the only way out of this, in my opinion, is that we have to really tap into the sectors that are actually producing. We need to go after the international business sector and force them into being a driver for the economy. We got to look at, we have to look at the tourism. How can we make that work? Let us be focused on there, and again, the sustainability. We got to look at and if there's anyone else that has any other solutions, feel free and throw them in. Let's try and get
energy is a big area to reduce the import bill as well.
The problem that we have with investments, that we talk about investments, we talk about foreign direct investment, but we need to be starting talking about net. Because the net investment, because which we'll address when we come to the tourism thing, is that what's the net from sandals? What's the net from any of the projects that's coming in? If the revenue is staying outside and the expenses are being paid in local dollars, we're not solving our problem. Right. All we've done is a short-term remedy, and when you get into the divestments, you have that same scenario where I call it selling. If you sell the cow today, you got to buy the milk tomorrow. So we may get the short-term impetus and fix the foreign exchange. But if on the back end you're getting 100 million, but 200 million going back out through the door, you're in a net of 100. So that's not helping you. Yeah. So we have to be very careful in that scenario as well.
What the balance we don't have is outbound investment from Barbados, investing in other territories where we gain investment income back
dividends coming back in,
or foreign exchange control regime for the last 50 years has actively discouraged that. If we had taken advantage of this even 40 years ago, 35 years ago, we would have some foreign investment income coming back into balance off. And that foreign investment income comes in terms of dividends, and might get reinvested in Barbados. One of the beauties of the international business sector is really the international business sector that demonstrates how effectively a strategy like that works for companies operating out of Barbados. Funds come in, flow into Barbados, go out for investment, come back into Barbados, and go back to the country of origin. How many people know you can use an international business company to do a manufacturing company in Barbados?
I don't.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Gild that. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
One of the points raised here, but we were talking about currency pegs, and one of the things you were talking about.
Yeah.
Someone mentioned here we no longer meet the minimum standards for the I think it's the ECCB, which is Eastern Caribbean Central
Right.
Bank.
So what? Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if the person wants to explain a little further, but I think what they might mean is that what the Eastern Caribbean Central Bank does is that they seek to maintain a certain level of foreign exchange reserves to back the currency that they hold. So they have a certain definition of it. So currency in terms of in your pocket as well as in the banks and stuff like that, and they seek to maintain at least to match at least 60% of that with foreign exchange. What they do in practice is match about 97, 98% of that. So for every dollar in circulation almost, there's an equivalent amount of foreign currency in the ECCB. The corresponding ratio for Barbados, I don't know the exact one, but it would be significantly below that. Just to show the relative, I don't want to use the word strengths, but what they have in foreign exchange versus what Barbados has, relative to the size of the economy and the spending power that they have.
Right, I just wanted to, cause I know we went into a lot of what we should have done, but what is likely to be the impact on citizens going forward? Because if we did have to go to an IMF program, and it stands subject to correction, but I was told, like, for instance, with Guyana, they faced double income tax. And I'm here saying, now imagining if my income tax had to double, how I would handle it, how would the average Barbadian handle it? So this is why I say I want to focus on, we can't go back in the past and change anything. What are the likely things to happen, and what is the impact, or worst case scenario impact on the average Barbadian, so that people can start to not panic, but prepare.
So if there were an adjustment, and let's say it followed some kind of IMF program, even if it wasn't formed with the IMF, the IMF has outlined in the Article 4 report a package, essentially what a package would look like for Barbados. What they think the Barbados government should do to get to a more sustainable fiscal position over the medium term. And there are a number of measures that they include. They don't really include, they don't really make much provision for additional taxes, actually. What they make provision for is, like I said, improving the effectiveness of the BRA to collect the taxes that are owed. But most of the adjustments come on the expenditure side. So dealing with the reform of state-owned entities, which might include some divestment, becoming more efficient in general in the public service, which would mean spending less on goods and services, and some marginal loss in wages and salaries, because as you become more efficient, you might need fewer people to do a job.
Are you using efficiency because efficiency also means companies use this word called shrinkage, but it's really theft. So is that sort of the efficiencies referring to? Because
Well, it's actually, if I can share, it's actually doing the things that said they are going to do in terms of the reforms. Because the realistic position, and Onatha got to go back and sit and said it very well, and BMO about 3 years ago. A problem is that we've taken the medicine, the Minister of Finance has administered a lot of the medicine that the IMF would have prescribed without the benefit of the standby arrangement to address the debt situation.
So we've put ourselves through the austerity.
We've put ourselves through the austerity, but we have not tackled the funding side and the reforms that they've said in terms of consolidation of NAC with RDC and UDC is still not there. And that component of it is what they're saying. You have overhead in departments that deliver social services and other economic services that are not efficient or effective. Get those right, you reduce your transfers, you improve the collection of the loans and the arrears from NAC to take those three entities in account. Reform and rationalize BIDC and Invest Barbados, and you will get for them to bring track companies back to Barbados to do manufacturing and other services in Barbados. Do those things and you will solve your problem. If, as the Bloomberg report said and the Moody's report said, the problem with the Barbados government has been slow on implementation of the necessary reforms.
Implementation deficit disorder.
Right? And if you go through the last 3 or 4 reports, in terms of the valuation, they have said categorically the valuation is not a preferred option for Barbados because the fall-off effects are even worse.
So for once we agree with the IMF.
Yeah, and there's an interesting article published about 3 years ago by the IMF that said categorically the prescriptions that we use, particularly for small open economies, and our recommendations with regards to devaluation, we were wrong. Okay? So it is not the preferred prescription. An economy like Trinidad and Jamaica, Ghana, that has large natural resources, primary producers, and the effect of the wages will not be, and a much smaller import footprint, are not as significantly affected with the devaluation like a country like Barbados would be, which is service-based, because they can earn their way out of it. We can't. We just don't have the, because our services don't have the capacity to do it.
So just to follow up, a couple of comments that were made. We had done a presentation on governments, and governments has to be key to this. It has to be the integrity legislation.
Which Donville said that they don't see as necessary.
Well,
so
no,
if we're not going to have
every
a government,
all the other countries, Guyana has signed on to Transparency International. All the lending agencies are looking towards the whole governance issue. So any lending agencies, you will have no choice. We rank in the hundreds of doing business in Barbados for a reason. That's not just. I don't agree with that. The right people weren't asked. We who live in Barbados and do business every day know that it's not easy out there. The Auditor General's report, at some point in time, some people got to start taking that seriously. Crystal did a great job in highlighting the issues. There's nuggets in there that should be found and gone after. And there's no point in going and collecting any more taxes and whatever if you're not going to fix the problems in the Auditor General report. Because as they say, that's like trying to bail a boat with a fishing net.
You have 7 entities that are highlighted in that report that owe the government over $700 million.
Which will solve a few deficit problems.
So I am here sitting down wondering why, and when we even brought this up with the same Minister Innes, and he said, yes, people get fines, they get penalties, the broad goes after them. I'm here saying, now looking at this report where these 7 entities have been owing this money for years. So when he speaks of the broad going after these people, which people are he talking about? He's not talking about these significant persons who don't seem to care or make any efforts to repay any money.
Is it collectible?
There's one that is not collectible because it's shut down. Jurat. Jurat is the one that's not collectible. Right. The others should be. These are functioning companies in Barbados.
That's a topic for it.
But this is when you're talking about estimates and you're talking about looking for ways to plug holes. And I'm not saying it can happen overnight, but 700 and some million, and Jurat was not a significant part of that. That seems like a significant way you could plug holes.
I just want to make one last comment on the IMF issue. I know people tend to hear the IMF and get scared, as you said, about the ramifications. One of the things that's been happening in the Caribbean, those countries that are under IMF programs, they've been playing a much bigger role in crafting their own programs, having the IMF review it and say, okay, we are happy with this. And then you go forward and you meet the targets that you and the IMF have agreed on. One of the things that Jamaica insisted in under their now concluded program is that they would maintain a minimum level of social spending. In other words, we understand that there might be some fallout if we have to increase taxes and cut certain expenditures, but spending on social services, certain social services must not fall below this amount. And it was actually in their program. So they could not fall below, if not they would fail that particular target. So there are avenues to cushion any blows that might come out of it. But of course, the longer you wait to make the adjustment, the greater it will have to be, because all the while you're racking up that
Yes,
interest cost,
exactly.
which adds to the deficit.
So going to the IMF is not actually as scary an alternative as persons are trying to make it out.
Before that, in the programs in the 70s and 80s, the IMF would not agree to those terms. And what they've been able to do, and maybe it's the Christine Lagarde as current president, has been able to say, look at what we said we would do and improve these economies, and look what we left. And the realization is, if you don't correct an economy properly, you destroy the social fabric, you increase crime, and you increase migration.
Yep.
Right? And those two things alone directly lead to further deterioration of economies. Migration of the best, and the destruction of the social fabric by increased crime.
So Shane, because I think we need to wrap up, because I found it a very interesting and stimulating discussion, because I learned a lot this evening, and I want to thank you. And I was just wondering if you wanted to do like there's a summary wrap and.
Okay. Well, I think we mentioned that the estimates debate is an important debate, because you get to understand what government is thinking for the year going forward. Clearly, one of the takeaways for me from doing the analysis is that estimating revenue and pinning your hopes on revenue, particularly in an economy that's not growing very quickly, is a bit more difficult than making expenditure cuts. And I believe it has contributed to the deficit not narrowing as much as we expected. I think, however, we have to, going forward into 2017-18, we have to think about not just what government expects to do in terms of the deficit, which is supposed to be about 4.4% of GDP, they say, but we have to look at how government is going to finance that deficit and the implications for foreign exchange reserves, which started the year at around 681 million. If government does not intend to finance that deficit using lots of foreign sources, then it has to make sure that it gets the foreign direct investment project started, and it accesses other sources of foreign exchange to maintain the exchange rate, the exchange rate reserves at a sustainable level.
Well, I would like to thank Shane for coming.
Yes.
I just want to remind everyone in the group that we're only facilitators here. Shane volunteered to come. There's someone else here that wanted to know how they can come on, and we'll contact them. If you have any solutions and ideas that you want addressed, that we can do it from an education perspective, as well as more from a solution perspective as well. We are looking for people as well. But I personally would like to thank Shane for stepping up.
Yes.
He has provided, there's a lot of analytical information which we're going to try and compile to put on his site. But just remember that all of us are operating on a volunteer basis.
Yes.
So our battery is almost out on the iPad. And we hope that you all had an enjoyable evening. Priscilla,
Yes, I sincerely want to thank Shane. I've known Shane for a while, but I have watched him grow, especially in terms of confidence in the last few years, and I'm so glad, because we have a lot of highly intelligent and intellectual persons that just need to have the encouragement to share their ideas and their thoughts and the way forward. And I'm especially glad that you would have had the clarification. There are many people who are also thanking you for the clarification with the IMF program, because that has been seen as a symbol of fear.
Right.
And knowing that it's going to be easy, but that it is not as scary as it's been made out to be. I hope Barbadians can then understand what direction we may need to go into and be able to lobby for certain things to happen so that we can see some kind of improvement.
So thank you folks for staying tuned for so long. Thank you.
Bye.
Yeah.
I got to now pick the chat up.
So my numbers different from yours. I think
Like
we
what we
know.
Oh.
I think, yeah,